Hello and welcome back to another episode of The Halfway Point. Today we're talking about something that sits somewhere on the to-do list of every practice manager, and that's kind of being ready for CQC. But this episode isn't going to be about trying to predict exactly what an inspector might ask, creating that perfect folder just in case CQC turns up, or even doing a mock inspection and then forgetting about it for another year. Instead, we're going to look at CQC readiness from a much more practical perspective. So where are you now? What is working? What are the gaps? And what we should actually do next? And to talk about that, I'm delighted to be joined by Ella Thompson, who's one of Locum PM's associates, who's been working with practices around CQC preparation. And we're pleased to say will also be joining us at our Preston Practice Manager Conference on the 10th of September. So, Ella, welcome to the podcast.
Hiya,
and
thank you.
To start, if you want to give us a little bit about you and kind of your background, especially around CQC, that'd be great.
Okay. Hi, so my name is Ella. I've been a practice manager for nearly 17 years. I was promoted through the ranks. I became secretary first and then practice manager for 5 years. And then I moved to another practice as the business manager. And I was there for about 13 years. So, yeah, I'm working with Locum Practice Manager, helping practices with CQC readiness. Had a CQC inspection ourselves at my practice in March, which went really well. And I think one of the main reasons it went really well was because we never really took our eye off the ball. We were consistently ready as much as we could be anyway for that phone call. So it was a case of just dotted the I's and crossing the T's and double checking everything when we got the phone call. So so that was just embedded into the practice. That's the way we've always worked.
That's a great point to mention, because where practices kind of thrive from what you're saying is where they stay CQC ready. And that's difficult, especially when you were last inspected some 8-9 years ago, around 2016, 2017. So it's hard to almost get back in that mindset. But I think just expanding on what you're saying is the way to thrive is to actually always have that mindset. So it becomes culture of the practice. Is that about right? Or am I kind of paying what you said? Yeah, that's
totally it. It has to be just embedded in the way you run. At the end of the day, CQC are setting the bar, aren't they?
Yeah, of course.
And there's a reason for that. I mean, it might be a bit of a drain, but there are reasons for having all of that in place and meeting those standards. And it's a case of just sort of keeping on top of it. And it just makes life a lot easier when you do.
Yeah.
It's difficult, when you're a practice manager, you've got so much on your plate anyway.
Yes.
And this tends to sometimes be something that gets pushed to the back.
Yeah.
But, if you can keep on top of it, it's certainly a lot easier. I didn't particularly panic when I got that phone call because I knew we were ready.
Yeah.
I knew I got everything in place. Everything was on TeamNet and everything was on there ready, and it had been for years. So historically, we could show that, yes, so-and-so does do that training every 3 years. They haven't just done it for CQC.
Yeah, got you. Yeah, that's true.
Despite best efforts, there were some stuff that...
Yeah.
You can't win with everybody, can you? So
I was going to say there's always one, but actually it's probably more than one.
Yeah, true.
And being inspected in March, was that, just trying to get my dates right, would that have been on the new framework kicked in around April, so would you have been on the old?
We were on the old one.
Notice for an inspection?
Yeah,
right,
they changed it just after, so that was an advantage in a way, really, because we knew what we were dealing with.
That's true. And I suppose, was there anything kind of you initially thought would be quite complicated or difficult with the inspection that actually wasn't?
I think part of the problem is sometimes, you read the Mythbusters, you think, right, well, I know I've got to do this, I'm going to read the Mythbuster, tell me how to do it, what's expected. And of course, it's a little bit grey because they sort of expect the practice to sort of interpret it and produce results based on that. So I think that causes a bit of anxiety, things like the immunisations for staff. I knew that was one they were particularly keen on and that they were looking into. And so it was a case of having to really go through all of that and just put risk assessments in for anything we hadn't got. Trying to get staff to have their bloods done for MMR and just making sure each vaccinated, we were covered on every single one. We suddenly realised that varicella, we needed to get that covered as well. So
of course,
we had to risk assess for all of that. But, if I'm really honest, AI has changed everything. I mean, I went to a CQC training event myself at the end of February, and I hadn't really been using Copilot, particularly up until that point. And then they were saying, I'm using it, it's brilliant. And you get it free through NHS Net anyway now. So, it's perfectly safe to use as well. And it's just a game changer, really. I just asked it. I'd have a staff member that maybe was missing a couple of things, and I'd just get a risk assessment done through Copilot for each staff member. So I knew we were covered for everybody, and it's a really good tool to use to help with your CQC preparations, really.
I couldn't agree more on that one. And that's something, if anyone's kind of seen some of my presentations, I hammer home the AI. And it's funny, people still feel it's like a cheat or feel guilty, and it's a tool to aid your work. You don't take it 100%, you still got to proofread it and cross the T's, dot the I's. But that saves you an hour per staff member, and at a large practice that adds up, that's a week very easily sometimes. So that's really interesting to hear then. And I suppose kind of on the flip of that question then, were there any areas that you were, I suppose, worried about that were easier than expected on the review? So we talked about the things that were more complicated or difficult, but did anything jump out at you and go, that was easier?
The one thing was safeguarding. We always get quite worried about that, really. We got a safeguarding register, and we'd set that up based on the requirements that I think were set out in the Mythbuster. We were having bi-monthly safeguarding meetings anyway with the team and the school nurse and everybody else. So we knew we were across this, and it was on the agenda for every meeting. Again, it's interpreting what they want. We set up a register for children, for adults, and we've got family members affected in there, and we reviewed it on a regular basis. I think I was a little bit worried, was what we'd done adequate? Was it going to be enough? And actually they did look at it, but they didn't spend a massive amount of time on it. I think with CQC, as long as you can show that you're aware and that you're doing something about it, it's when you turn around and say, oh no, I haven't really done that, or you've got something that's very, very basic, that they're going to be unhappy. And then they just went onto the system and just checked our children were all coded and flagged, and it was that assurance really that they wanted as much as anything else. They also looked at end-of-life patients and went through those and wanted to know how we look after them, and wanted to look on EMIS to see if they were all properly coded and on the GSF and things like that. So we had got all that done, but I didn't realise we were going to go into that in the depths that they did. That's the thing, really. You've got to be ready on absolutely every level. You don't quite know which one's going to be picked out to be examined in depth,
Yeah, and I think that, kind of picking up on what you said earlier about like the risk assessments, that's if there's a gap, risk assessment seems to be kind of the rule of thumb. And again, using the AI, not reinventing the wheel and stuff like that.
It's brilliant for that. Brilliant for risk assessments. I mean, I got a risk assessment for absolutely everything I could think of, but I also created a risk register, which is actually a really useful thing to have, because it's almost like I think of it as a bit of a worry list.
Interesting. You know what I mean? That's a nice way of looking at it.
It's anything that sort of keeps you up at night, anything that worries you in the middle of the night. You think, what am I going to do about that? What if that happens? What am I going to put in place to mitigate against that? And basically, it's a bit like just writing a list. I mean, you say risk register, you think, oh my God. But actually, it's just a list of the things that are worrying you, what you're going to do about them, when you're going to deal with them by. And it's an ongoing thing. So once you've dealt with it, that's it. It's off the list, and you put something else on, and you take it to all the meetings. And has anybody else got anything that they think's a concern that we can? It's an active document,
It's an active, you.
And I found that really useful, actually.
And is that just hosted through, in your case, GP TeamNet then? Is that just a live, or is it a live kind of, on your SharePoint?
I haven't got that one on. I hadn't got that one on TeamNet. You could put it on TeamNet, but I'm not sure if you can. I think they've got an area for risks, haven't they, on there? But ultimately, I've never used it.
It needs to be what works for the practice. So, if the format you've got works for you, that's it.
Yeah.
I love the fact that it's live, so and you're encouraging people to add to it.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
And I think the takeaway from that for me then is that CQC, almost they're acknowledging that there isn't a perfect practice. There's always going to be something on the risk register or the to-do list or whatever. Exactly. So it's about, I always say it's like you're aware of it. You don't want to give CQC an inch.
That's
you don't want
right,
to give them
yeah.
that string to pull on. So actually what you're saying is, yeah, we're aware of this is what's coming, we've got some building works later in the year, blah, 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 blah. So, and then that ticks the box, and they've got the confidence that you're running the practice safely and successfully.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
good. So, and I think you've kind of picked up on some important points, because it's, there isn't a magic formula for CQC, despite kind of what we've seen over the years. Every practice is their own,
Yeah.
and likewise for any other organisation across the NHS.
Yeah.
And even experienced PMs like yourself, you're constantly learning because of those changes,
totally.
the regulations,
Yeah. Yeah.
and the way CQC approaches the assessment. That most useful starting point is simply, I guess, where are we now? So, going from there, where do you start? I mentioned about where are we now, but what does that mean? Kind of how do we actually get CQC ready, do you think, from the starting point?
I think it's about understanding where your practice is today, making those continuous improvements that you need to make, and just creating a practice where you've got quality, safety and good leadership embedded in everyday work, really. It's an ongoing thing. And then the inspection readiness is just a byproduct of that, and not an objective of it, really. I mean, the standards are there to protect both patients and staff. So
Yes.
really, it's what you should be working to anyway, really. I'd have been lost without an intranet. I think probably most practices do use it's either TeamNet or Practice Index, are the two main ones, aren't they? I mean, they're just an absolute boon, really. We hadn't got as much, obviously when they first came out, the first inspection week, everything was in folders, and it was all laid out for all, whereas it's a lot more paper-like now. We've got TeamNet and everything's sort of on there. It's a case of saying, I must admit, I didn't give her access. I did think about giving her access to TeamNet, but then I thought, I don't know about that.
Oh, okay.
I'll show her what she needs to see. You could give them access to TeamNet. I mean, why not? There's nothing to hide on there, and they can have a good look through it.
And I think actually in the settings you can control what they see anyway. So you could just
that's
they
true.
can see training records and this, but that's it. They're not seeing any internal stuff or.
That's right.
Or
so there's nothing on there that's private anyway, really.
No, true.
So yeah, in terms of how to get ready, I mean, If I were going into a practice now and I wanted to check that they were CQC ready, or if I was in my own practice, I think the best thing to do first of all is just to take a good look around, have a look in the waiting rooms, have a look on the notice boards. Sometimes it's better to do things like that when the practice is empty and you haven't got people in the way and you're not being hassled, and you can just calmly walk around and have a good look at everything. Then you tend to notice where there might be a health and safety risk, or if there's wires trailing on the floor that you didn't notice because you're so busy in the day, things like that. Talk to the staff, understand their understanding of how the practice runs, what their role is, what do they do, do they know who the lead is for safeguarding, do they know who the lead is for immunisations, are they confident in their role, are they happy, are there any concerns there, it's got to be a whole team effort at the end of the day, and they've got to feel included, because those receptionists, I mean, they have to deal with, a lot on that front desk, and it's a really tough job. So just getting a feel for everything first of all. Your policies and all of that, yes, they need to be reviewed on a regular basis, but, it's so important to check that whatever's in that policy reflects exactly what you're doing. There's no point in just downloading a policy, sticking the practice name on it, and away you go, because CQC will see straight through that as well.
Yeah.
They'll have all of that in advance. I had to send all the policies off in advance for her to look at. I actually sent her so much information that she was just bombarded with stuff, really. They send you a checklist, and I just sent her so much stuff because I just thought, well, you know what, I've got it, you might as well have it.
Good on you.
I don't think she'd ever had so much stuff come through before. Just a bit overloaded, really. But, I just sent everything through, and I did as much as I could in advance. I sent her as much stuff as I could in advance. Things like your training records, I mean, with things like TeamNet, you've got constant reminders to staff anyway to repeat the training. But obviously, you'll still have to remind staff to do it, because I think there tends to be a sort of, when CQC come, I'll do it then. But, they will check the records, and they will say, well, that training should be repeated every 3 years. That staff member's only really just done it now and
Yeah.
hasn't done it for the last 6 years, you know.
Yes.
So constantly, it does make you feel a little bit of a nag as a practice manager because you're constantly on at people. But you know, most of your staff will realise there's a reason for it.
Yeah, that's one of the feedbacks I hear the most. You know, I'm just constantly nagging, and it's
I know.
but
I
we
hate
have
that.
to. I think, you know.
The way it is.
What could a day of learning mean for you and your team? Join primary care leaders on Thursday the 10th of September in Preston for a conference packed with practical sessions and workshops on a range of key areas, including CQC, finance and premises. Outstanding practices aren't built by one person. Instead, they are built by teams working together, supporting one another and leading with confidence. Whether you're an experienced primary care manager, a deputy PM, business manager, GP partner, or an aspiring leader, this is your opportunity to come and spend a day with like-minded colleagues. Together you'll be able to learn from our experienced speakers and suppliers whilst discovering practical solutions to the challenges every practice is facing today. So for more information and to secure your place, please visit Locum. We look forward to seeing you there. We talk about some of the systems being like CQC ready. So you've got your team there, you've got your practice index, but actually what you're picking up on is that, is it CQC optimized? So, you know, do the staff know where to go? Do the staff understand the policies? You know, are they accurate? And you talked about the training history. You know, are you setting time aside for them to do the training, for them to read the policies? And it's more than just, right, I've done my job as the PM, I've put the policies on, they're up to date, off you go, read it, do the training and everything. It's picking up on what you're saying, is that then becomes the culture of the practice, I guess. Is that a fair assessment?
Yes, exactly, yeah. Yeah. It's the ethos and the culture of the practice,
right.
Really. I mean, we sort of had CQC on the agenda for every practice meeting we had, and I'd sort of bring up a different element of it each time, just as a refresher, really. You know, do practice staff know who the freedom to speak up guardian is? Because nobody ever knows, do they? I mean, people forget. Is the leads list up in receptionists, and they refer to that if they need to. So we, going back to freedom to speak up, we'd sort of have it as a 10-minute agenda item for the staff meeting, like who is this, what is the whistleblowing policy, freedom to speak up policy, what's in it, what are the main points that you need to be aware of, and not just for CQC. It's not just about ticking the box for CQC, it's because they should be aware anyway, you know, that they can do this if they feel that strongly. There is somebody they can go to if they're not happy with the way the practice runs. And, you know, another time we might have significant events. What is a significant event? You know, are you considering good practice as well? It's not all about we did that wrong and now we need to put it right. You know, what did you do? What do we do that was right that we need to report on? Did we get a nice compliment? And, you know, all those things were important as well. And just talking to staff about that and how the process runs and getting their feedback, encouraging them to come forward with ideas and for improvements all the time.
That was going to be my next question, actually, about, you know, do you get staff involved? And the short answer is from what you're saying is that yes, absolutely. And it's lovely to hear how you're capturing that. It's making, again, that culture, making it part of the meetings. So are you finding then that there is now people will speak up? Maybe a bad choice of words, but will share ideas or share feedback? Do you find more now then? Yeah, okay.
Yeah. You encourage that open sort of feedback, and people know that they won't be judged. And they, at the end of the day, the people that we're all doing an individual job at the end of the day. You know, I might go and help a bit on reception, but I'm not doing that job all the while. The people that know what needs to be improved are the people doing the job, so you've got to go to them. And I mean, at the end of the day, every practice is constantly evolving and constantly improving. I mean, it's an ongoing thing, really. You're always tweaking and improving the way you run the practice, and everybody's got to be involved in that, really. You know, significant events, I think I had 12, so we had like one a month, really. I'd like to have had more, really, if we could, because I just think rather than showing what you're doing wrong, they're showing, you know, life happens, things don't always work out right, and you don't realise there's a problem till it happens. So let's put it down there, let's show, we recognise this is an issue and this is what we're doing now to mitigate against it. And those are great things to be able to show CQC.
Again, you're a live practice, like you said, things go wrong. So looking at kind of the work you started doing with Locum PM around helping other practices then, I think this is something that all PMs can recognise. You know, you become almost too familiar with your own practice, and that's a blessing and a curse at the same time. You know, you talked about like walking through reception and noticing cables and stuff like that. You know, we can walk past the same notice board, we can walk through that same reception area every day, but you might not notice it. You know, our brains and our minds ignore it, or you know, it's been on the to-do list, but it's been on there for the last 6 months or so. So how do you find it kind of coming in and kind of asking those questions? You know, why do you do it this way? Have you thought about this? What's kind of your feedback on that process, really?
I think it's just useful to get a fresh pair of eyes on with everything, really. You know, I think that's quite liberating for a practice manager, because we do get a little bit bogged down in the day job, and as you say, we don't always see things that maybe can be done differently. And I think just talking through processes with somebody else, another practice manager with experience, is really good learning for the practice. Every practice runs differently. And the practice I'm in now does things really, really well, but they do things slightly differently to the way the practice I was in before does things, you know, and you will take learning from each of that and sort of basically take that knowledge to whichever practice you're at and make suggestions. I mean, at our practice, we did modern general practice, you know, we did all of that, and the most useful bit of that, I found, if I'm really honest, was the networking side of it, was where we'd sit and go, right, well, what do you do with repeat prescriptions? Talk me through your process. Well, okay, I hadn't really thought of doing it.
Oh,
That's
I love
a good
it.
idea.
Yeah.
You know, it's all of that sort of thing. I love the networking side of things. I love the conferences as much for the networking as everything else, because and suddenly when somebody suggests a different way, do you think, didn't I think of doing that? That's a great idea, you know, and that's what you sort of take back. So it can be useful. I think it's useful for people to sit with somebody as well and talk through their processes, because that clears it in their mind as well. You know, they actually sit down and think, right, this is what we do with our document management. So this happens, this happens, this happens. And it clears it in their mind as well, because like I say, as a manager, if we could all sit and do everybody's job, we'd probably tweak as we went along and make a lot of changes and think, actually, why are you doing it like that? You could be doing it like this, but we don't have the time to do that. So this sort of sets time aside to go through all of those processes and see where changes can be made.
And it's also, I suppose it's also about letting the team learn and thrive and grow on their own, you know, giving them that space to do it wrong, almost, in a safe way, I mean, you know. And then exactly. They learn from that, and then they put their own systems in place, and so that's really helpful. So I think looking at kind of as come near to the end of this episode, like let's make it really practical. So someone listening today wants to do something today, tomorrow, next week that kind of improves their CQC readiness. What are a couple of things you would suggest they look at?
Okie dokie. So the first thing is that I'd do, if it was my practice, is I'd do the walk around first of all, on my own preferably. I'd have interviews with everybody. I'd talk through what they're doing in their job, how they feel they could make changes to make improvements. Because very often those sorts of conversations don't happen until they're at appraisal, you know, and even if you encourage staff to come forward before, they often don't. So just going through all the processes, I'd make a list of everything that I feel that needs doing, and then I would consider who I could delegate some of these jobs to. It's important not to feel you've got to do all of this as a manager. There's just too much. You know, can you give the fire responsibilities to somebody to manage and to do all of those checks on a regular basis? I'd make sure that CQC was on the agenda, pushing it home with everybody, including partners, because partners don't tend to be too fond of CQC sometimes, and it's a necessary evil sometimes, you know, that they've got to accept what needs to be done. I know one big area is supervision, and I think a lot of practices struggle with fitting in time for that, and also feel that maybe they're already doing it. But it was one area that it was the only area we got pulled up on with supervision, was making sure you're setting time aside to go through you know, clinics or whatever with your sort of nurse practitioners and paramedics and those sorts of stuff. They really, really want to see that you're allowing time for that. So we had to put a policy in place to cover that.
That's an interesting one, because we often think of supervision as like the registrars and, if you're a training practice, the trainees, but I'm really glad you said that about the nurses as well. It's kind of all staff, clinical and non-clinical, again, going back to you giving them time to learn in their role, or you supporting them. So that's a really interesting one, actually.
It's really relevant at the moment. I think it's relevant as well because of all the other stuff that are coming in. There was the PAs and all of that was in the news, and I think they just want the reassurance. That's all CQC are after, really, is just reassurance all the time, that you've got it covered, that you're aware of it, that you're on top of it, that you're looking after those staff and that you're aware of what they're doing and reviewing their consultations, talking to them about any problems they've got. And it doesn't have to be a massive amount of time. You can just set 20 minutes aside maybe every couple of weeks, sit down with these staff and just talk through any issues with them. What else? I'd have a good look at TeamNet or Practice Index, see what was on there, go through any relevant policies, choose the main ones first of all to make sure they're reviewed, your safeguarding, infection control, all of the main ones, and then do the rest of them after that. Make sure they are relevant to how the practice runs and they're not just a standalone policy that doesn't actually reflect what's really being done. I make sure that we've got audits in place to confirm, that we were safe and that those were being reviewed on a regular basis. Risk assessments, as I say, use AI to help you with risk assessments. Just put in what you want, put in what you see the risks as, the problems as, and that will create a risk assessment for you with no problems. And just focus on the continuous improvement of the practice rather than just preparing for the inspection. CQC's attitude now is the so what kind of approach, really. It's like, okay, you've got a policy, well, so what? Show me how it works. What are the outcomes? How can you prove that? It's no good just telling me you've got this. I want to see how it's working and why that's a good thing. I want to know about your systems. They're not daft. They know they can tell a well-run practice pretty much straight away, and you've got to be able to evidence that to them as well. So make sure you've got that evidence, make sure it's all being recorded. I had a file, I just put literally everything in there, and I really encourage staff to do the same. If they got evidence of good practice, let's just keep a note of it, let's put it in there. So we've got all that evidence, and that was part of the stuff that I sent to her in advance, really, so that she got lots of evidence as to how we were continually evolving and improving.
So they almost saw like the shop front of the practice before they even walked in the door, because you've sent them all that evidence. Yeah, exactly. That's brilliant.
Yeah. And they will do interviews with your staff as well. You'll have a list of you'll get a list before of questions that they're going to ask the staff. So, you can sit and sort of talk to the staff about what they need to know. The interviews that they do with the rest of your staff, you won't really know what they're going to ask, but you'll get a sort of idea based on the questionnaires they send out to the other staff. So, so it's just sitting down with staff and going through all of that. But, it's important not to just think of CQC as a tick box exercise, really. It's got to be a way of life. It's got to be, you shouldn't have to panic at the last minute and think, God, I've got to do this, I've got to do that, I've got to do the other. It's got to be an ongoing thing. And if you're finding that you're struggling for time, you need to speak up, really. Speak to your partners, see what you can delegate, and just make sure everybody's got responsibilities for different areas of CQC rather than it just being all on the practice manager. And the other big thing is, of course, the CQC searches from Ardens. Get those downloaded and run those and repeat. We started to run them on a quarterly basis. We set them up so that they would run for the last quarter, and we just constantly keep on top of it. And it's good practice anyway, because they're quite good use of searches.
Yeah, they are. Yeah, they're a really good set of searches, and obviously that's built with CQC. Well, they're built with CQC, aren't they? So hopefully you're going to be running them and getting very low results because you're doing the work anyway. But you don't want to trip up over a few missed searches that could have been avoided, So that's really good to point that out. We're delighted that the work you're doing with Locum PM in helping practices with their CQC, and really pleased to have you joining us at our upcoming conference in Preston, the Practice Management Conference, as I said at the beginning, on the 10th of September. So if anyone in the area kind of wants to hear more from Ella, their tickets are available on the Locum PM website. And I think kind of that's a really lovely place to kind of wrap up today, because the takeaway for me is that you don't have to know every answer before you start, but understanding kind of where you are now, and making that culture within the practice really helps with kind of what comes next. So a question I kind of started to ask everyone really when they come on the podcast to end, we spent a lot of time talking about CQC today, governance and some of those challenges that practices are facing, but looking ahead more broadly, kind of what excites you around the future of primary care?
I love finding out how different practices run. It's just, you learn so much, and I love being involved with people as well and talking to them about their roles. I love being able to help practices as much as I can with CQC. I mean, I used to, like you say, just dread it really and just think, oh God, no. But actually, it's quite satisfying really when you've got all your ducks in a row with it and you think, actually, we're keeping this ship steady and it's going well, and we want to show off about this a little bit because we're proud of what we do here. We have really, really, really good access at my last practice, and we were very proud about that. And it's nice to be able to shout about different things, get your PPG involved. Our PPG was actually a very supportive PPG and very enthusiastic.
Good to hear.
Yeah, I mean, it's all about meeting the bar that CQC set and knowing that as a result of that you're providing a good and safe service. I don't think CQC readiness should be something that practices only think about when the inspection's mentioned. I would say the strongest organisations are those that are continually reviewing and learning and improving. And if you understand where you are today, address the gaps early and celebrate what's working, the inspection readiness becomes the natural outcome and the sole objective of that, really.
That's a lovely note to end on. Thank you, Ella, for today. That's put me in a good frame of mind. Trace the rest of the week, Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I'm off. So if you've enjoyed today's episode, please follow or subscribe to the Halfway Point podcast and usual platforms, and share it with someone as well. Colleague PCNs who might find this kind of discussion useful, especially those who are daunted and kind of overwhelmed with the prospect of CQC. We've thrown some links around today, so I'll put them in the show notes, which can be found at locumpm.co.uk for this episode. But Ella, thank you again for joining us today. It's been lovely hearing a different side to the CQC, a more positive side. Thanks everyone for listening, and we'll see you next time at the Halfway Point. Thanks, Ella.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today for another episode of The Halfway Point. We hope today's conversations have given you a fresh inspiration and practical ideas you can take straight back into your practice. You'll find all the links and resources we mentioned in the show notes at locumpm.co.uk. The Halfway Point is available on all major podcast platforms in both audio and video formats, so you can tune in however suits you best. If this episode helped you, we would generally love to hear from you. Leave us a review or a comment. Not only does it make our day, it also helps us shape future episodes around what matters most to you. Make sure you follow and subscribe so you do not miss next Wednesday's episode. And if you know a colleague who would benefit from this conversation, please share this episode with them. You can also connect with us on LinkedIn and Facebook by searching for the Locum Practice Manager. We're on YouTube too, where we share practical tips and tutorials for primary care managers. Until next time, keep moving forward, keep improving, and we'll see you again next week at the Halfway Point.